Hello, and welcome to A Crosstalk, a series hosted by Renew America Together, focused on fostering bipartisan dialogue, encouraging civil leadership, and healing the political divisions of our current American society. Renew America Together is a 501c3 established to minimize the effects of divisive rhetoric through bipartisan dialogue and education. My name is Lincoln Zaleski. I'm a disinformation specialist at Renew America Together and the host of A Crosstalk. This is the 8th episode of our series. I'm joined today by Tamar Barsamian, product manager at POLITICO. Tamar, welcome to the show.
Hi, Lincoln. Thank you so much for having me.
So we're going to just dive right into the questions, if that's okay with you.
Great.
Could you give us a little bit of background information on how you got involved in the media space and your journey so far?
Sure. I would say, like most poli-sci majors living in the DMV, it was my senior year of college, and I was doing a research project and happened to be using Politico for research and thought a desperate college student looking for a job, Politico would be a really fantastic place to work. So I looked up their jobs and saw something in the sales department, and I thought, I can do the qualifications of this job. And a little bit later accepted a position there. And so I've been at Politico now almost 3 years, hard to believe. And then during that time, I transitioned over from the sales team to the product team. And I now work on our business-to-business platform that serves government professionals on the front lines of policy. So that's anyone from folks on the Hill to your government relations professionals at big Fortune 500 companies to state and local governments. So really serving anyone who needs a pulse on policy and politics, and have just really enjoyed working in such a fast-paced environment throughout election cycles now, throughout the pandemic. So truly every day there's something new.
Yeah, absolutely. I can believe that. So the reason that I wanted to interview you today is that Renew America Together is doing a blog post series about media literacy. And you have dealt with all the different facets of the media, starting from the people who purchase media, the consumers, all the way to the production side and who makes the media itself. So I was wondering, in your opinion, why is media literacy, and specifically awareness of the media environment, so important for Americans today?
Absolutely. I think Americans right now are struggling with information overload. And I think there's so many different places, venues, environments to get media, whether it be listening through a podcast, and then a lot of people getting it now through their social media, Facebook, Twitter. There is just ample places to get information. And I think what I have really enjoyed working on, and I would say one of my core philosophies, is just giving information as seamlessly as possible, because that's how I would want to consume information. So especially working with policy professionals, those impacting legislation, influencing legislation, it's critical that folks are getting the information they need fast. And that is, kind of the heart of DC, is people just needing information, accurate information 10 minutes before the next person, before they hit the floor of the House or the Senate, or whether it be in a lobby shop.
Yeah, that's definitely true as well. We often hear something like information is the backbone of democracy. And it really is true. When you think about a dictatorship versus a democracy, one of the main tenets is that they're going to censor media, they're going to censor outside information, they're going to censor new information flows for people to have, and prevent the information that people need to hear from making good decisions from reaching the populace. And so it's not surprising that the capital of our democracy is so information-based, and how critical it is for true information and good information to get out to the public.
Mm-hmm.
So along those lines, we often hear, if you believe that, then you've fallen for propaganda, or something along the lines of, they're just wrong. Do you
Mm-hmm.
believe that we as Americans have a responsibility to each other to be media literate and share good information? Or do you believe that some people can no longer be helped and they're just trapped in a bad information loop, and we don't have a responsibility necessarily to them to provide good information?
Yeah, that's a very loaded question, Lincoln. I think there's a couple of different elements to this. I think one, let's assess people's core values, but then the way they view the world, their lens. So I think for me, I think that people can definitely get stuck in their own tunnel vision. Maybe they just found an article or something that they are really passionate about, but sometimes, that doesn't align with maybe their party or something. I'm just thinking about a very, very general consumer of information, and that people can say, oh, but they said this, which means they're definitely a Republican or definitely a Democrat. So I think we're living in an environment that is very quick to judge. And so I think that being a listener and taking all the possible steps to inform yourself, to inform your peers and educate your peers is the most important thing to obviously avoid propaganda. Grateful we live in a democracy, but finding ways, especially in those conversations, I think, I'm thinking taking my Politico hat off, but my peer-to-peer hat. If you're in a conversation and someone's really heated because they care about an issue, it's going to the root cause. It's why do they care about that issue? Where did they get that information from? And then you take a moment to reflect on your own belief system, and maybe that's an opportunity for you to learn something new and move forward with a new token of information. So I think it's all about how you're assessing your lens, where you're getting information, but also taking the opportunity and the time, if it's something you truly care about, to assess all areas to educate yourself and then others.
One of the things that we talk about in the media literacy space and the disinformation space is a variety of sources. And I think that's really what you're touching on here, that yes, you can be passionate, yes, you can care about something deeply, but unless you've done the research and tried to find the good information on it yourself, you're not going to be an expert on it. And so I think being a listener and taking in other opinions and taking in other thoughts and ideas is good in building out the entire image of what fact or truth can be. And so
Totally.
it's not one opinion, not one way. And if it's politicized, it's probably not wholly correct. So I think that makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think also, especially in the last election cycle, there was almost there's a healthy level of doubt and distrust in media, which, everyone, no matter what you do, should always be challenged and doubted. But I think we almost swung the pendulum so far to say X reporter who's been in this career for 30 years is not credible compared to a blogger, for example. And I think that's where we enter into a really dangerous space of saying that someone, is incredible despite having several degrees or having a whole career in journalism. And I think that's where not forcing your opinion, but taking the opportunity to listen is becoming increasingly critical.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that we've written about also on the blog post that I would encourage everyone to go and read if they have not yet is the difference between healthy skepticism and cynicism. If you're being healthily skeptical, right, you're
Mhm.
looking at things in order to find fact and truth, and you're not going to believe things the first time you read them. If you're cynical, you're never going to believe them. You're not going to believe them outright, no matter what. And so I think that's what you're touching on, is that we've almost crossed from this healthy skepticism into an unhealthy form of skepticism or cynicism. And it's really dangerous for our society.
Absolutely. That reminds me of, I think it's Tim Snyder's book on tyranny. So definitely a really great read and a very quick one. Talks about skepticism.
Well, I will link that in the description below. Thanks for sharing. Moving on, in your mind, what would a world where everyone was perfectly media literate look like? How is it different than our society today? And what do people act like? What is this society like?
Certainly. Well, that sounds like a glorious world. Yeah, that's definitely a loaded question, Lincoln. So I feel like we could probably debate this for hours. But I think a perfectly media literate world would rely on a couple different elements. One being philosophical, historical, and then factual or scientifically based. So I think that, anytime I'm listening to someone who you're like, they really did their homework, is one that is referring to the truth. And you know that they're backing that statement up with ample evidence, and they can disprove other theories. So I think it goes back to the root of problem solving, finding the hypothesis and proving it or disproving it. So I think that would be a very skim the surface of my idea of a perfect media literate world.
That's great. I think that it kind of gets at the idea of critical thought and critical thinking. So what we were talking about before was healthy skepticism, and that's the critical part. But then you're talking about the thought component. People would think based on evidence and, rely not on the first thing that they read or not on the first thing that their grandmother tells them, but something that's evidence-based and backed up by science or history or philosophy or logic in some way. So absolutely, I think that's a great society, something that we'll strive for. I think one major problem is that only a small percentage of Americans have had any experience at all with learning how to consume information well and how to be media literate. How do we best overcome the information gap between those that are media literate and those that are not in America, in our society today?
Yeah, that's another really great question. And I think that if we think back to the last 20, 30 years, the digital age has just been so rapid. We went from print to media, what feels like overnight. And so I think finding information and identifying whether this is based in truth or opinion, I think helping people identify, just the difference between an op-ed versus something that is factual, and helping them make their own decision. Because oftentimes I think when, say for example, your mom, your grandmother, your grandfather is consuming information on TV versus Facebook, those are very different venues of consuming media. And so I think helping folks understand, and maybe that's at a very early age, which I definitely think it should be embedded in school curriculums, and ways to, one, promote diversity in education and in the ways that people are consuming information, and have that be, key distinctions saying this is an opinion or this is fact. So that person can recognize, oh, this is someone's interpretation of this issue. This isn't the factual evidence per se from that event or issue.
Absolutely. One of the things that we've also talked about in the media literacy space is, are you able to differentiate the difference between fact and opinion? And an opinionated statement, something like only 32% of Americans were able to differentiate when presented with 5 facts and 5 opinions, were able to differentiate all 5, which is a really low percentage. I mean, 32% is slightly less than a third. So in that way, I think, like you were saying, integrating it into school systems is a great idea. Educating the public into the difference between different kinds of media. It sounds very basic, but ultimately most Americans are really bad at it. And I think it's a great solution.
It's certainly a challenge we're all facing together.
So the closing question for the show is always the same. We've gotten some pretty great answers to this in the past, from Ruth Bader Ginsburg all the way to Maya Angelou. If there is one policymaker or civil society figure that you admire or try to emulate, past or present, who would that be?
That's a really, really phenomenal question. I think it'd be a combination of a few very powerful women. Ruth Bader Ginsburg being one, so instrumental in the law. I think nowadays Amal Clooney is someone who I really look up to, fighting for human rights. So definitely just inspired by really any female leader fighting for human rights. On a more personal note, that would probably be my answer.
Thank you so much for joining the show, Tamar. It's been great chatting with you and having you on. Do you have anything that you'd like to promote or talk about with your job at Politico?
Sure. I mentioned Politico a number of times. Also, being an employee, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention what I work on closely, which is Politico Pro. So if you are a policy expert yourself looking to get a pulse on the media, politics and policy, legislation, the regulatory space, feel free to contact me regarding Politico Pro.
Great. Well, stay tuned for coming episodes of Across Talk next month. And feel free to visit Renew America Together's website for more information about bipartisanship and healing the American divisions of our society, as well as research about disinformation campaigns and voter fraud. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more bipartisan conversations. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Lincoln.